All right, open your Bible up to Genesis 8. We have been working through Genesis. We saw the corruption of the earth. We saw this sons of God, daughters of men, creating this horrible situation on earth where the whole earth ends up being soured against God's leadership. The whole intent of man is evil all the time. God only found favor with Noah and his family, instructs them to build the ark. They build the ark. God brings animals. They enter the ark. God seals the ark. Last week we looked at the flood itself. And we, by the way, we put the year of the flood around 1656 after the creation of Adam. That's going to be between 23 and 2500 BC for us. But 1656 years after creation, if you go and do the math, according to Jewish history, it's the 17th of Cheshvan in 1656, and that's as good of a date as anybody else's. You know, in my studies this week, once again, I don't know why I'm geeky this way. Something I had long concluded. I went back to remind myself why, and regarding dates. In that case, it was the date of the birth of Christ, which I think is probably 7 BC. And you look at everything the Bible tells you, and you lay that in a spreadsheet, and you come up with the best guess you can, right? So we know Herod dies in 4 BC. We know Jesus was a couple years old at the time it would have taken for them to flee to Egypt and then hear that the man that wants you dead is dead, and then to get back. And you do the math on all of that. The fact that Herod killed everybody 2 years old and younger tells you that it was probably a 2-year gap from when that edict went out. And then the fleeing, I'm guessing 7 BC. Now, that doesn't matter to our purpose today. I'm just saying that's the best you can do is guess. You know, it's an educated guess, but it's still going to be a guess. Jesus was about 30 years old when he started his ministry, so that would have been about 27 BC. We always say Jesus died around 27 AD, and he died around 30 AD. I think that all of those numbers bring you to this place. So based on all the data we have, greater minds than mine throughout history have put these things together. I refer to this often. On your way to breakfast, on the right wall, before you get to the office, there's this big poster, and it's the Bible timeline. Most of that's based on Ussher's work. Ussher probably spent more time and energy than anyone in all of history trying to timeline biblical data. He's the one that has the 4004 BC estimated creation date and whatnot. But we're estimating 23 to 2500 BC was the flood. So we saw the waters came. We saw they covered the highest mountains. We saw the duration of the flooding. The waters rose for 40 days, but then they held the ark up, and we're still in the ark. And so the waters prevailed on the earth in verse 24, chapter 7, 150 days. And then we today get to chapter 8. Let's read that, 5 verses. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 7th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the tops of the mountains were seen. On the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So our big subject here is the receding of the waters. And the first thing we see is the decrease of depth, of course. That's what needs to happen. They're not all gone, but they're gone enough that the ark can rest. So God remembered Noah. That word is zakar. And it means not remember in the sense that God, didn't forget. God doesn't forget. He can't forget. He has omniscience. But he remembered in the sense of he was mindful. This was part of his plan all along. It's not like he had to, Noah's still floating around down there. He's watching everything constantly. So that phrase just lets us know that the time came in God's sovereignty that Noah got to be freed from some of the burden that he'd been carrying for, at this point, 120-something years. God made a wind blow over the earth. The word wind is ruach. Ruach is like pneuma. Ruach is the Hebrew equivalent of pneuma. Both of those words translate in Old and New Testament either wind or breath or spirit. And so depending on context, you have to determine, is this wind, is this breath, is this spirit? In this case, it seems like it's a wind. This is, you could ask the question, is this a figurative use of ruach? Is it God made his spirit blow over the earth? It seems more likely in this occasion, we're talking about the idea of water abating is probably a literal wind. I think that God's spirit is always involved in everything that happens, and so that argument is valid to consider that ruach here is spirit. The end result is God did it, so it doesn't matter. God made the waters to subside, but we are seeing a wind here, and it's a supernatural wind because God is directing it. So in that direction of that wind, the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heaven were closed. Rain from the heaven was restrained. Now, chapter 7 seemingly ended after the 150 days, but chapter 8, we're now going back into the 150 days. This is the principle of recurrence. We talk about that a lot in Scripture. A lot of times the Scripture will tell you this happened, and then it comes back and tells you about that happening, and it goes on to something else, and then it jumps back and tells you a part of what happened earlier in more detail. That's an interpretational principle with a story told with overlapping points. So we're picking up before the 150 days, at the end of the 40 days, the stopping of the water sources, because we were told in chapter 7 that happened on day 40. So we're going back to day 40, seeing the fountains of the deep and windows of heaven. The rain stopped and the water stopped coming up out of the earth, and then God sends a wind and the drying process begins. And the result is, it says, and the waters receded from the earth continually. That is, the word continually is the Hebrew word go or went, and receded is the word shub or returned. So the idea is that the waters returned and went, if it were, seemingly indicating an upward and a downward return. Waters that fell from the sky went back to the sky. Waters that came from under the earth went back under the earth. We were discussing last week, if you do a search, Google search on water and under the earth's surface, it is staggering how much water is in the planet. And it's not just in the crust. They have now discovered water in the mantle. The mantle is waterlogged. And if all of that water were brought out, I think we could probably flood the earth in a way that is unimaginable, even more than this flood. I don't think that God exhausted the water surfaces of the earth. I think he pulled them out from the ground and down from the sky at a pace sufficient to cover the mountains 20 feet, which Mike made the point last week. That's probably just enough to draft that ship. Maybe so. But now they're going down and they're returning to where they came. So our timeline then, if the Jews are right, and I don't have any reason to question them, if we have the 17th of Heshvan, 1656 from Adam, 2,500 years BC or so, second month, 17th day, the waters increase 40 days, they stay on the earth 150 days. Now the question is the 150 days after the 40, or does the 150 days include the 40? Verse 4 says, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. That's 5 months exactly from the start of the flood to day 150. So there's our answer. The 150 days includes the 40. So the waters prevailed from the moment the rain started, and then finally they started to subside. So the 150 days, we had 40 days of rain, 110 days of recession of the water then, to the point the ark rested. So it says the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. This is a good teachable moment. We've talked about this before in this series, but it's a good time to bring it up again. When we read, and theologically we talk about antediluvian, that means things that happened before the flood, or post-diluvian. So the flood is a marker event that was so transformative that when it comes to geography, geology, in fact, a lot of science, even to the point of, and this becomes a big deal in creation debate, to the point of looking at our earth and making determinations about its age, even things like carbon dating, uranium dating, all of your radioactive dating techniques. How does a flood impact those things? And the answer is substantively. You do certain experiences with carbon and radioactive dating underwater, and you get crazy different results. You look at the decay of any type of matter underwater versus on the surface, you get crazy different results. You look at geology, and in geology, you're looking at a place like the Grand Canyon, and you see all these layers, and it's really easy for you on the surface. In a post-diluvian world, we're not flooding the earth right now. None of us have ever seen anything like that. And so observational science looks and says, the rate dust settles, it would take, a billion years for that layer to form. And the simple fact is, that is true if the world never flooded. But if the world ever flooded, everything changes. And a whole lot of the debates between the naturalist and the biblicist have to do with that flood event. Whether it happened or not changes everything. And what's interesting is every naturalist in every part of the world, they say, at one point this was underwater. There was a great flood at some point in this area, and that 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 area, all around the globe, but we pretend that's not the case. The historian has to acknowledge that every ancient culture that goes back pre-2500 BC, every one of them have stories of a global flood. There are none who don't. And every one of them have stories of dinosaurs. They call them dragons, they call them serpents, they call them monsters. They name them Grendel and different things, but they've all got these old stories. Put all that together and you realize the biblical account fits way more perfectly into what should be observational science than people think. It only lacks the ability to acknowledge what the evidence clearly shows, and that is there was a global flood. In fact, our very fossil record indicates a global flood. Anybody know how fossils are formed? Where do fossils come from?
It's a rapid, develops rapidly.
If a brontosaurus died in our parking lot and we left it there in perpetuity, what would happen to it? Turn to dust. Yeah. Sooner or later, we're going to sweep it up with a broom. Flies are going to land on it and lay larvae. The larvae are going to eat it up, and they're going to make more flies. Lots of flies. Boy, a dinosaur can make some flies. And the vultures are going to stop. The coyotes are going to come by, and everybody's going to get their little... That's what happens. The only way to turn that brontosaurus into a fossil is to completely and rapidly cover him. Now, when I say rapidly, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if you do it slow, the body's going to bloat and float and rot. The water has to cover him quickly so that the microbials that would feed on him don't have oxygen. And the best solution is that they also don't have clean water. If you cover him with water, mud, and silt, and you just get him really submerged under gunk, then he'll fossilize. We know this. Fossilization occurs upon the rapid burial of living organisms or dead, trees or whatever, or other things. But fossilization is a conversion that is a result of the rapid burial. So, both sides of the debate, if we're honest with each other, this is simple. We today in observational science, what do we see? We see layer after layer after layer of fossilization. Someone should say, at some point, all this fossilization is evidence of a great flood. Well, they do. Here was a great flood, there was a great flood, here was a great flood, but nobody will say that the whole earth flooded because that's too biblical. But if there was a great flood, we should expect to find layers of sedimentation, and we should expect to find layers of fossilization. And when we observe the world around us, what do we find? Layers of sedimentation and layers of fossilization. So we are watching that happen here. These waters abated, and as they abated, we are creating our Grand Canyon. We're creating the landmass. Now, the whole point of all of that was to say, when we talk about an antediluvian, a pre-flood geographical point, we cannot and must not assume it matches the post-flood geographical point. The mountains of Ararat we know, because Noah landed on the mountains of Ararat. So what are called the mountains of Ararat in this account are the mountains of Ararat, but everything before now is suspect. Because we had the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Pishon, all these things we've seen mentioned, all these geographical landmarks we've seen mentioned leading up to now. Who knows where they are? Who knows what they look like? So, we do have the mountains of Ararat. These are the mountains of Ararat that we know. In fact, we can reasonably assume that the height of the mountains of Ararat, as we know them, remain fairly constant because the height would have manifested itself either through volcanic or seismic activity or through erosion activity, and the erosion is all happening as the ark lands, so it lands and the erosion goes down, and those mountains have never been flooded since, I can tell you that. So, what we know about the mountains of Ararat right now is accurate. Notice here that this is not the mountain of Ararat. The Hebrew says the mountains, plural, of Ararat. So when you go on the map and you look up Ararat, it's somewhere in Turkey, I think, you'll see a mountain range and you'll see a mountain called Ararat. Don't assume the ark is there. People have been assuming that for thousands of years and looking for it and not finding it. But there in that range. The highest peak in that range is 17,000 feet, but it's not certain that it rested on that peak at all. It's somewhere in there. It could have been lower, it could have slid down, and in fact, anything could have happened, but for reasons we're going to see in verse 5, it had to be high up. So this is that range, and I say Turkey, it's Turkey, Russia, Armenia, Georgia, the whole area in there that range really covers, somewhere in there, possibly between peaks. I guess it had to be on a peak. It's not like it's going to land on a peak and balance precariously. But the waters, Josephus, by the way, claimed it was Armenia. Josephus said the ark. Josephus was a Roman historian that wrote around the time of Christ. He's very, very helpful as a historian. He was very hated as a historical figure because he was kind of a traitor to the Jews. He basically wrote well. He wrote detailed histories, and he coddled to Rome because he wasn't stupid. And so Rome kept him around, but yet he did a great deal in preserving a lot of Jewish history for us, a lot of biblical history, and something that was important to the Jews, he would comment on it as a Jewish person. He wanted to preserve that, and so in all of his writings, he did these histories. He tells us about the Great Wars, the intertestamental period. He's just really, really useful. He claims that the ark was visible in Armenia in his lifetime. So in the time of Christ, roughly, the ark, according to a modern historian in that day, was still visible. I can tell you today, no fewer than 3 that got close enough to like make the cover of Newsweek, Ark discoveries have been made, and all of them have been debunked. So it's still remotely possible that one of the 3 is the Ark. You can Google Earth a place right now in Turkey that from the sky you're like, that could be an Ark, but there are reasons that it's been debunked. We don't know where it is today, other than the mountains of Ararat, and if it exists, if it's made it. It's 3,500 years is a long time for a chunk of wood, to hang out and make it through. And if it was still in good shape, we got to find some gopher wood. We got to start, whatever that stuff was, start planting that, because that's what you want to build your house out of. So waters continue to abate till the 10th month. That's 2.5 months further to the next observation. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So the ark lands on the tops of the mountains that were visible to the eye. By the way, that must have been hairy. If you're a boat guy, the idea of being adrift, and you see landmass coming towards you, and landmass there, and landmass there, oh man, they were puckered up. I would be. I'd be just panicking. I'd be thinking about my lower unit, but he didn't have a lower unit, and he didn't have a steering wheel. So God took care of it. But it landed on the tops of the mountains, and the tops of the mountains were visible to the eye. So this accounts for the draft of the boat. Hits the mountains and stops, but not yet, able to see the mountains, and then the mountains become visible. Tops of the mountains here is plurable. Tops of the mountains being seen. So the boat hits and stops, and water keeps going down, and the boat's probably going to go down slightly with it, but it's finally going to settle in that range at some point. Verse 6 to 12. We release the kraken. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the windows of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the earth, from the ground. The dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days and again sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So he knew that the waters had subsided from the earth, and he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return anymore. So we have 4 really trials of releasing the kraken here, sending out the birds. First, the raven. At the end of 40 days, he opened the windows of the ark that he made, sent forth the raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. So it's a little confusing. So, into 40 days, so we're now in the 11th month. He opens the window. This is probably one of those top openings we see in 6:16. From that description, though, it seemed like that window was always open and had been closed. I don't know how that works. Possibly there's another window we don't know that wasn't discussed in chapter 6. But he sends forth a raven. A raven is later described as an unclean bird. It's a carrion bird. And it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Seems like a bad choice for this experiment. A carrion bird's going to find all kind of stuff to eat. Dead stuff everywhere. And so he never returned, but Noah saw it flying around. So I think probably the carrion was just a bad choice. Then we hit the dove 3 times. I think the dove was the right idea. See if the dove finds something to eat, a place to land. The carrion bird can land on the mountains and eat the corpse of dead anything it finds. So it seems like experiment 1 was just a bad choice. Dove 1 then in verse 8, he sent forth a dove. I don't know how long he waited for the raven. No number of days is mentioned there, but we can confirm as a 10. He sent forth a dove to see if the waters had subsided. So by sending a dove that would not be able to eat all the rotting food around, it's going to be looking for something that it can eat for real, something growing. He thought he was going to get a better outcome. Of course, and we see something different here too, because we don't see the instruction that God told Noah to do this. God's been telling Noah to do everything. And here we just see Noah doing some things, and without specific instructions from the Lord, at least in the text. Now God's going to speak, but he hasn't yet. And it said the dove found no place to set her foot. She was looking for a different environment. She's looking for a tree. She's looking for a roosting spot and looking for something to eat. So she returned to the ark. Dove gets hungry. She knows where food is, going back home. And by the way, birds are pretty notorious for roosting in the same spot. You know, we got a couple chickens we hatched out, and they don't get to be with the other chickens. These are special chickens. I don't know why, but they're special. And they roam the yard. The other chickens are, but every night they go roam the yard, they scratch up everything, make a mess everywhere. But at the end of the night, when it starts getting dark, you know where they are. They're in their spot. You go close the gate, all is well. That's kind of Bird 101. You know, sunset, we go home. So the dove didn't find a new home, so she came to her old one. Dove number 2. He waited another 7 days and again sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening. Behold, her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So he knew the waters had subsided from the earth. So another 7 days at this point. We're at least halfway through the 11th month. In her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Literally, in the Hebrew, plucked olive leaf. Fresh is a little editorial here. But the point is, it was plucked. It's a leaf that had grown out of an olive tree and was plucked by the dove. So, olives, by the way, just so you know, thrive in high altitudes. The olives in the high altitudes would have been the last things for the waters to cover and the first things to be uncovered. These trees survived. And I guess, you know, we really have some questions about the reconstruction of the earth after this, and to what extent was there a supernatural work of God. And maybe we'll delve into that, but in case we don't, there's a sense in which all of this is understood as a recapitulation of creation. We have Adam and Eve, creation mandate, take care of the earth, multiply, fill it. And then we have the destruction of the earth, or the uncreation of the earth, as it were. Now we have Noah and his kin, and something akin to the creation mandate is going to begin again. So do the earth fill it? So we have this idea of the recapitulation of the first created effort in another one. Is part of that God supernaturally enabling? He almost had to. I don't know what in the world the two big cats, for example, ate if it weren't two of the smaller animals around them, right? Which, you know, that's, you know, somehow he had to provide for them. And somehow all of those smaller animals had to find something to eat in a world that was in a world that was flooded, and typically those things are seasonal. And, you know, big questions there. And of course, that allows the naturalists to say, see, that couldn't have happened. You don't ever say, see, that could have happened from a faith perspective. God is God. He does what he does. He created everything out of dust. If you believe that, you don't have a problem with the ark. If you don't believe that, then you're going to have a problem with everything. So I don't care what you think about that. But this is an olive leaf that was taken from a tree. It was a good leaf from a tree that was still alive from the flood. So Noah knew the waters had subsided from the earth. Again, subsided here doesn't mean gone, but have receded. Kalal, here is the word curse, or figuratively the word abate. It's the idea of it's going down. So dove, take 3. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. Hopefully he cut her husband loose about that time. I don't know. Another 7 days. We're at the end of the 11th month, possibly longer, because we don't know how long he waited between Raven and the dove. But at this point, clearly, the dove found a place to roost, to rest her foot. So, one of the questions we have is, why couldn't Noah just look out? He's in a mountain range. Why didn't he just look out and see that the waters had gone down enough to get out of the ark? Well, it's possible he didn't have a good range of vision. You think about being in a mountain range, you could be in a cup. You know, the ark's sitting here and you got peaks all around you and you can't see over them. I guess you could get out and how muddy is it going to be? I don't know. But it makes sense that he didn't have a good range of vision. In fact, the next verse Noah removes the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. So it seems like the way the ark was built, he didn't have a good way to look down, possibly. So let's go ahead and look at the drying of the earth further. We got a little bit of time. We've got to quit a little early today because the choir is going to be coming in. In the 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out, and God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that's with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creepy thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm the earth. And be fruitful and multiply on the earth." There's the reiteration of the creation mandate. So Noah went out, and his sons and sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. So we have our official dry date then. Verse 13, 601st year. Now this is the 601st year of Noah's life. That's the only number reckoned in the 600 range. So the first month, that's the first month of the year, first day of the month, the waters were dried from the earth, so the earth was restored to its normative state. Flood activity was thus completed, reversed, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. So here it seems that probably the roof of the, all of your pictures of Noah's ark in your children's books, you got this little ark and giraffe's head sticking out, and you got that little house top, you know. That might actually be something like that because we've obviously got a covered section, and instinctively you're thinking that perhaps the humans were on that topmost level where they had better airflow or they had some visibility, and they worked all these bottom levels. Don't know any of that for sure, but it seems like he took the roof off. He wasn't able to see out, and it may be that the ark was so big and that top level, what we would call the gunwale, the freeboard was so high that he couldn't see over it. And by taking the roof off, he could climb up to the roof line and see down. It is the way that feels. I don't know, but it feels that way. Nonetheless, he's able to see the ground now. And so we now see an official dry date. Now we see the exit date. In the second month, 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. At that point, it's a second dry date, it seems, but not so. This is simply a reference. The earth had dried out. That was already done. At this time, the earth dried out, and God moves and speaks. Second month on the 27th day, 2 months have passed since Noah noted the earth to be dry, and now God says to Noah in verse 15, "Go out from the ark." So this is the day that God gives permission to leave the ark. And so Noah had been searching for dry ground for months, sent out birds 4 times, then waited more weeks and more weeks, finally removes the covering and sees for himself, and then he has to wait more until God says, "All right, you can go." Talk about God and human patience. We read biblical accounts, and I know for me, I don't know about you, but I oftentimes scold myself for my impatience because I might say, this has been going on for years or months or weeks. David was anointed king and went back out to shepherding sheep. Moses was called to be God's leader, and I think it was 40 years later he actually got an assignment. God oftentimes has this known course of action, and he takes his sweet time. He's got all of it in the world. We don't. I tell God that a lot. I'm now telling you my private prayer life. I say that to the Lord a lot. I say, "Lord, I don't have time for this," as if he doesn't know, you know. And of course, he laughs. Like, "Clutch, you got as much time as I say you do. I can be 150 if that's what he wants." But I'm like, "Lord, I'm flesh. I don't have time. I don't want to waste time, waiting on. I want to be working at this. I want to see progress. I want to, And the Lord knows my heart, and He's patient with me. And He might be thinking, "Oh, you're going to be dead before that happens. Somebody else is going to do that. You don't even know. You're going to be dead tomorrow. Stop worrying." So who knows? But the time periods and the patience that these men of God in the Bible have is stunning. Huh? Well, that's true. He had more time than I do. That's a good point, Mike. I'm going to remind God of that. You want to be this slow with me, then let me live to be 600 like Noah did, or 800, whatever he lived to. So, there's a lot of waiting. But, verse 18, Noah went out, and his sons and his wife's sons with him. Every beast and creeping thing basically went out by families. That word is mishpachah, and that's the word family, not in the domestic sense, but in the sense of a grouping. Not necessarily even in an official, what we would think of when we think of the animal classes, phyla, family, and all that. It's not, that came about way later from the time Genesis was written, but generally by grouping. And so you think the cat kind, which there were only 2 of, went out. The dog kind, every kind that there were a couple of went out together. One of the things that is possible there, that is also rational there, is we've been on the ark a long time. How many new births were there among those animals? Is it possible that the 2 sheep kind, well, there would have been 7 of those, they tend to have twins. By the time we left the ark, we might have had 7 sets of twins, so we might have 21 sheep now. 14 little ones and the 7 old ones. And the birds lay a clutch of eggs, hatch them out, they may all be leaving, we don't know. Time has passed that could be, and so that word family may indicate that. Certainly possible. So, back to our timeline, and we're done. In the 2nd month, 17th day of Noah's 600th year, that's of Noah's 600th year, I'm adding that editorially, the flood started. Noah enters the ark 7 days prior on month 2, day 10. He exits the ark on the 2nd month, 27th day. I'm just backgrounding all this for you. So he's in the ark 378 days, counting the first day and the last day. So, well over a year and almost a couple weeks. The flood lasts to the first day of the month of Noah's 601st year, so the actual flood was 313 days. He waited an additional 58 days before and after, 7 days before the flood, 51 days after, for a grand total of 378 days that he was on the ark. That's a long time, a year, a whole year in the life cycle, so theoretically every pair of animals there could already have a generation of offspring. We don't know that they did, but they could have. And it would make sense that they would have. This doesn't sound very kosher for Sunday school, but what else is there to do? They're going to make babies. They're sitting there. They got food. They got water. They got shelter. They're going to make babies. Yes, sir.
One question on the ark when it flooded. For 40 days and 40 nights.
Is
there a possibility that God was teaching them and teach your eyes on me and not on, don't put your eyes on something else?
God's always teaching us a lesson. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's touching on something, I think. Maybe that's the reason for the covering.
Yeah.
God didn't want them to actually see what was being done. They couldn't look out.
And that's certainly possible. Let me highlight this so I know where we are next week.
You know what's God saying? Trust me. Stay in the ark.
Yeah.
Let you know when you come out.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, Corey's not here, so I got to
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Is this possibly
He told me he's going to run down here and ask one.
the time that the ice age began, since there was water close to the polar?
A lot of people believe that, yes. A lot of people believe that. And that it could have been the creation scientists, and it's all postulate. So we have to be careful that we are looking at the same evidence as the naturalist, but with the faith aspect of trusting our historical accounts from Scripture. And so and just like an algebraic question, you throw another variable in, you're going to get a different answer. And so the variable of the flood is real being thrown in to the same data set. A lot of them have come to that conclusion that yes, that's when we got our ice caps, our polar plates, and that an ice age may have resulted, but there's a lot of question about the extent. Some of the ice age data really goes away in the vein of a global flood. You don't need an ice age in some of the things that make them say there's an ice age if you had a global flood. If you had a global flood, for example, some of the ice age shifts they see, some of the ice age burying they see, fossilization, whatnot, goes away. But there may well have been an ice age that did cover a large portion of the earth. Obviously not where they came out because yeah. But how long does it take for that ice to melt, and how long does it take for people to grow up and fill the earth? That's not a quick process. So, yeah. So, if it was good where they were, it's possible lots of, and it may just be that the ice shelf was 20 times bigger than now, but you still had that big medium warm zone. I don't know what everybody says about all that. That's beyond my scope of thinking, but good question. Yes, sir.
So, one common argument against the flood and, trying to portray it as myth is, how did the animals eat? And, from my understanding up to this point, one, Noah and his family would have been vegetarians, right?
They would have.
Well, what about, the animals? I guess that would be question one, how did they store, what would be a good, counter argument to someone that would...
A couple of things. Number one is food storage. We have every reason to believe that Noah provided food sources for them. But second is, when you're talking about an account that involves a lot of supernatural work, this is not a naturalistic argument. And when you take naturalism out of the argument, and you have to do that to get the flood. This is God saying, I'm flooding the whole earth. This is God's supernatural, superintendence of nature, such that the whole world floods. So if God superintends nature, if he's controlling nature, then he can control nature. He could make them all eat straw for a year. He can make them all, any number of things could be that we weren't told. But to take a purely naturalistic argument and apply it to a supernatural biblical event is an unfair advantage to the naturalist, because we're now kowtowing to his worldview and allowing him to reject ours. Our worldview is that, no, you don't measure God in a test tube. And that's why they reject God, because they can't measure him in a test tube. So let's all play the same game. You're right. You can't measure him in a test tube. So you don't get to say this couldn't have happened because you can't measure him in a test tube, right? And the whole faith element is that these accounts of these men in Scripture are real accounts. And if they're real accounts, then God has all of this supernatural ability that doesn't fit this paradigm at all. And so all those arguments are kind of come to naught at that point. It's like saying, how could, and actually this one, we meet in the middle on this one. How could God make everything out of nothing? That's not possible. And at that point, I say to the naturalist, aha! How could everything exist at all? That's not possible. If you want to be purely naturalistic, things don't spontaneously arrive on the scene. And we, at the point of the generation of matter, and that's all the way at the top of this pyramid that the naturalists and the biblicists are going to argue, but at the point of the generation of matter, we both have to agree something somewhere put it here, because things don't just exist. And at that point, we found God. And from there, it's just an argument about who he is and what he's done. But they'll never take it that far. Okay. We're late, but the choir's not waiting at the door, so I guess we're good. Thank you, Father, for the opportunity to study your word together and give us wisdom. Lord, as we engage the world around us that tends to be very naturalistic and tends to very much lack faith in your word, in you generally, and everything else that you've done, help us to be patient, merciful, and yet dutiful and teach in a way that the people around us can see the light of life. Thank you, Lord, for the food we're about to have. I pray that you'd be with our service when we return and be glorified.